365 Sports, SEC Mike will join us at the top of the hour. His impact and thoughts about the impact of the Nico story and much more. But let's get to Shehan Jeyarajah CBS Sports joins us. Paul Craig, David Smoke, 365 Sports. Shehan, what are your thoughts about what does all this mean? Are we like over modulated on this story? Is this going to change the way things are with Nico?
Well, I think that college football in so many ways was ready for, I guess you could call it the limits of NIL and the limits of pay for play. And this is an example of it. This is a team that was in the college football playoff last year with a 5-star quarterback, somebody who they obviously invested a lot of money in to get to Knoxville, deciding, you know what? We're going to test the market. We believe that there is a limit to how much value that you can provide. And somebody was going to be the first. Somebody had to be the first. But I think the fact that Tennessee is the first is fitting in a lot of ways. In fact, if you go back to the beginning, like if you think about some of this stuff in terms of the lack of ability to regulate NIL, the lack of ability to regulate the transfer portal, a lot of it was actually caused by lawsuits filed by the University of Tennessee. So they've been at the center of this era for a while, but to decide essentially, hey, you know what? We're willing to let go of our starting quarterback because we think that we have to be a little bit smarter from a valuation perspective. I do think that it is a big deal. And I do think that depending on what happens to Nico Iamaleava next, it could have major implications for how players see their own market.
Yeah, it's a very complex thing in that it's fine for him to want to see what market's out there for him. I mean, that's business, right? And see what's there. And the rules are such that he can, but it also, like, he's also the canary in the coal mine for maybe this was not the best way to do that, especially if you just talk about dollars and cents. He's doing it in the spring portal where 15 of the highest bidders are out of it. I mean, realistically, like, those are the teams with the most money. You can't go there by rule.
No, 100%. Like you mentioned, he can't transfer to another SEC school. The other thing, too, is that, yes, of course, he is a big-name player entering the spring portal, but you also won't have a spring to prepare. It's less valuable to go in as a potential starting quarterback anywhere when you don't get a chance to work out in the spring with your team. He's going to have to go in the fall and try to win a starting quarterback job. And look, he's a very good player. He has a chance certainly to do that, but it's a lot less of a home run if you do it in the fall than if you do it in the spring. The other piece of it too is, you know, look, like you said, if somebody wants a raise and they ask for it, like, there is nothing wrong with that. The thing is, we don't have a precedent at this point, at least a public precedent at this point, of a player essentially trying to do a holdout and leaving the team and sitting out of practices. And at this point, I think that Josh Heupel coming out and saying basically that's unacceptable. We're not having that, essentially. I think that that's going to be something that's really impactful, because let's just say hypothetically that Nico sat out of 3 spring practices or whatever it was, and then they renegotiate and he comes back. Well, all of a sudden, the whole rest of your roster, as well as, by the way, other teams and other players in college football, come back and look and say, well, you know what? That was a way for him to ultimately create leverage and negotiation. Josh Heupel, by handling it the way that he did, shut it down right from the start.
Shehan, what do you think the market is for Nico at this point? What are you guys kind of hearing in terms of interest and, you know, what might be next and sort of where he is in this whole story right now?
Well, there's a couple pieces to this market, right? One is the monetary piece of it. He was going to make between like $2 and $2.5 million to play at Tennessee this year. He was searching for $4 million, which would have put him up with the Carson Becks and some of the most highly paid quarterbacks in the country. I think it's very unlikely that he makes notably more than he would have made at Tennessee. I think that maybe he can get back to that number, but you start looking around and, you know, Football Scoop reported Notre Dame and USC aren't expected to be part of this process. Texas Tech, it's been reported, will not be a part of this process. So, I mean, look, there are options out there, but they look like UCLA. UCLA, obviously a team that's very close to his hometown of Los Angeles. He obviously, I'd imagine, would get some consideration there, but is UCLA willing to pay $2, $3, $4 million for a quarterback, especially one coming in the spring portal? That's a little unclear. There's been the connection potentially to North Carolina that's been out there, but again, same deal. Are they going to pay $3 to $4 million for this prospect? It's a little unclear at this point. So I think the market has been, certainly for Nico's camp, lighter than expected. And the sort of very public approach to this, I think, it really ends up being a downside. I mean, to go back a little bit to last year, right? We had a similar situation with UNLV and Matthew Sluka, where he leaves the team after 3 starts because he felt like he wasn't paid what he was owed. And he kind of got blackballed in some ways. And it, especially when you talk about the quarterback position, your intangibles and the way that the team looks at you, it's a big part of your perception. And so I'm curious if that ultimately does play in whenever you talk about some of the biggest of the big boys getting into the conversation.
Shehan, what is Dan Lanning, in your opinion? Is he a hero? Is he that's what a lot of people think of him because of the fact he said, okay, this is wrong. I need to let Josh know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly if you're a coach, right, if you're Josh Heupel, like, you love the fact that kind of you aren't willing to go under the table. And I think that when you look at this entire market, frankly, like, we could use more transparency. We could use more, I guess you could call them whistleblowers. We could use more people just involving themselves in this process to create transparency, to create a little bit of a fair market. Now, at the same time, like, I think that some of this as well is that this is coaches trying to take back some of that power, especially from quarterbacks who have so much leverage during this process. So, I certainly wouldn't go as far as to say, hey, you know what, he's a hero for this, that he's, just a good guy or whatever. But because there are ways that he benefits as well as a college football coach. If people are, I guess, whistleblowing and kind of trying to regulate this market a little bit. But I do think that ultimately he is somebody who, through this process, and again, look, it's just report at this point, we don't know for certain, but he is somebody through this process who seems to be trying to push for just a little bit more transparency. And I think that ultimately for this entire system to work, we need a little bit more of that.
What is Tennessee's optimum strategy going forward to replace him, given that this spring portal window is not where you normally would see the glut of quarterbacks that you would maybe in the winter?
Well, there's a couple pieces to this. First of all, we mentioned it on the Nico side. He has 15 options of schools that he has no option to go to because of the SEC's transfer rule. Well, it's the same deal with Tennessee. They can't necessarily go and get one of the other quarterbacks in the SEC, whether a starter or, for example, we hear from Alabama today, Ty Simpson's probably the guy. You can't go get Austin Mack, their backup quarterback, to potentially come in and start. So that does impact their process a little bit. Some of this is going to be just fundamentally dependent on how they want to play this and how good they thought this team was going to be in 2025. You've got a young quarterback there in Jake Merklinger, who was a highly rated kid, but certainly no Nico Iamaleava. Next year, though, coming in, you have Faison Brandon, the #1 quarterback in the class of 2026. And so the question is, if you bring in a sophomore or a redshirt freshman, are you risking scaring him off? So I think that you have to manage that as well. And the other piece on top of this is, like, how much money do you want to throw at the problem? Do you want to throw all of the money that you were going to pay Nico, $2.5 million, whatever it is, and try to poach away a sitting starter at another school? Or do you kind of say, you know what, we're going to ride with our young quarterback who we have some confidence in and really try to bolster the roster with some of what's left instead? So there's a lot of different ways that they can approach it. I mean, I think an obvious one would be, obviously Josh Heupel's former offensive coordinator is Alex Golesh, who's at South Florida now. Mm-hmm. Well, South Florida has a really good quarterback in Byron Brown, who might make a lot of sense and also probably wouldn't break the bank for you necessarily to go and get. So a lot of different ways to approach this. If I had to guess, I'd imagine they do not go out and get a truly entrenched starter. I bet that they add another talented body to the room and let the contest work itself out.
Shehan, what has been your interest level in spring ball this year? We showed a clip of Oklahoma, the Crimson Combine. It wasn't a regular spring game. It was just a combine. It was basically glorified drills, and they had 5,000 people, whereas less than 5 years ago, there was like 50,000 people there. And Ohio State's done this. I mean, basically everybody has. Just where are you with spring ball and how much it matters and how much you actually like digest stuff from it at this point?
Well, I think that former Oklahoma wide receivers coach Cale Gundy had a good tweet about this, and he just tweeted out a picture of the crowd from the combine and said 50,000 to 5,000. That's where we're at, and that's where we're at, right? The Alabama pseudo spring game completely empty. The Oklahoma pseudo spring game completely empty. Like I've said it all off season. There are so few things left, especially from an offseason perspective, that are really valuable and interesting for fans, and we're starting to cut more of them. And I think that the early returns are in. Nobody cares about watching, a guy that you want to watch play football go through some drills or go to a combine event. Like nobody wants to watch that. You want to be a part of the action. You want to get to see your guys, throwing passes and catching balls and playing defense. And again, like, it's just one of those opportunities, especially as a fan, where you get to be a part of the team and a part of the action for very little money or no money in many cases. So I think it's been a total disaster. I thought it would be a total disaster. And I really hope that this is a wake-up call to programs like Alabama and Oklahoma, some of the greatest programs in the history of the sport, that, you know what, if you keep giving fans worse and worse, they're going to give you less and less.
Yeah, do you really think if the settlement passes that we'll be able to at least wrap our arms around something or stuff it in a big thing that Santa brings down the fireplace and lays in front of our tree and we know what all of it means? Or is that ever going to happen?
It's a good question. And so what I'll say is that the House settlement, whenever it comes down, I think will have some clarity. And I do think that there are rules that will be followed for at least the short timeline. When I talk to people around the sport, many of them are planning, for example, for this rev share cap. And, again, the sort of collective piece, like everybody's kind of trying to figure out how to approach that. A lot of places are getting rid of their collectives and just moving to this rev share model. But the big thing that's going to come to a head is eventually somebody is going to sue in order to have the right to pay their players more money and say that the cap set in the House is an antitrust violation. And that's when we're really going to figure out, does the NCAA have legs to stand on after the settlement, or does it not? Now, look, I think nobody wants to be the first one. Nobody wants to be the person who has to do it because, again, I do think that the House settlement will be a major legal precedent that the NCAA has not had on its side before, but we won't really know until then. So I think we'll start to get a little bit more of a sense of normalcy, and I imagine that the NCAA will try to pass some minor rules along the way, but there's a reason that you look, and almost every single week it feels like the commissioners are up in Washington. They understand that until this is federal law, the way that this is going to work, you can't ever feel fully confident in it.
Shehan Jeyarajah with the CBS Sports. Paul?
And that's they're not barking up the most efficient tree in that regard as well. Shehan, do you are there any stories outside of Nico and this chaos that have caught your eye this spring as a keen observer and paid observer of college football?
Yeah, I mean, a lot, right? I think that, you kind of go team by team, you kind of go conference by conference. I mean, I think it's going to be a really interesting year for quarterbacks in college football because, there aren't necessarily a ton of superstar first round pick types, but there's a lot of guys with a lot of upside. Obviously, the headliner is going to be Arch Manning at Texas, really stepping up and being the guy. But I mean, again, I think that you look at, for example, the list of quarterbacks in the Big 12 right now, there are 13 or 14 who have a chance to be pretty darn special. I think that also sticking in the Big 12, what's happening at Texas Tech right now is crazy. Right? Of course, David Bailey is the latest to join their transfer class. It pushes them to the #1 transfer class in all of college football. Obviously, they understand, especially pre-House, this is a last moment that we can really try to flex some money and try to win big. But they have invested more into this season than almost anybody has invested into a single season over the past few years in college football. Probably the only one close would be Ohio State this past season, investing more than $20 million into their roster. So they're going to be a fascinating story to watch watch. I think that also, you look at some of these quarterback battles across college football. Notre Dame, CJ Carr versus Steve Angeli. Alabama, Ty Simpson versus Austin Mack. Of course, the consortium of guys at Ohio State who are battling it out for the job. I think that also the way that Michigan integrates Bryce Underwood is going to be really interesting. They brought in a transfer in Mikey Keene to try to ease things along. But again, there are so many known names who left after not just last year, but the year before that. This is, I think, kind of the moment where we start to get some of that star power back, especially at the quarterback position.
Shehan, thank you, buddy. Appreciate you jumping on with us. Enjoy your work. You can look at him up on Twitter, CBS Sports as well. Shehan Jeyarajah joins us and is a part of 365 Sports.